Hello, and welcome to our conversation about taking steps to improve equity, diversity, and inclusion in our places of work and communities. It is brought to you by the Greater Parkland Regional Chamber of Commerce and Town of Stony Plain Family and Community Support Services. Land acknowledgements are becoming more common, and many people are asking what they are and why they should be speaking them. The conversation takes place between myself, Mike, Renata, and Ada of BadaB Consulting. At the end, we'll also take a moment to tell you about our recognition badges that help you take steps and demonstrate your commitment to equity, diversity, and inclusion. Now, let's get talking. To start us off, Renata, land acknowledgements. What are they, and why are so many people and groups doing them?
Sure. The land acknowledgements we have today are based on old tradition of protocol carried out by Indigenous communities in Canada. They are intended as a way for guests to show their respect for and pay homage to the Indigenous community in which they are visiting and engaging in. It recognizes the strength and wisdom to the place that has given rise to the people who are at that land. Land acknowledgements are a practice, but they're also a part of a larger process we are undertaking as individuals and organizations towards reconciliation between Indigenous and Indigenous peoples in Canada. The idea is to practice land acknowledgements in a meaningful way.
Locally, we understand land acknowledgements in relation to Indigenous peoples and practices of Indigenous people in Canada. This is a response to the calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Are land acknowledgements only related to Indigenous peoples, though?
From what I've seen, it is largely an Indigenous practice. However, I do feel comfortable in saying that certainly there are other cultures and groups that make specific efforts to honor the land, its resources, and their history with the territory. I'd also comment that land acknowledgements are both an act of respect and awareness of place, and a social comment against colonialism. Colonialism is the practice of occupying another territory and gaining economic and political control over it. Thus, when land acknowledgements are given by non-Indigenous groups, it is making a statement of, we recognize that we are standing on the land of others, and in this way is beginning to make an integration of the two groups instead of a hierarchy of the groups.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Nowadays, I often hear land acknowledgements at formal functions or corporate events in Edmonton. For example, a very standard land acknowledgement I heard was, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Métis, Dene, and Nakota Sioux. We acknowledge all the many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Are these the same in other locations in Canada?
They do vary across Canada based on several factors. The Native Governance Center suggests that some of these are the Indigenous people groups connected to the land. For example, in Edmonton, it's common, as we know, to refer to the Cree, the Saulteaux, the Blackfoot, and others. But in Vancouver, it's common to refer to the Coast Salish groups. And in Toronto, the Mississaugas, the Chippewa, and the Wendat. Another factor is the treaty area or the unceded land and its history. And then another factor is higher profile or historical relevant people of the Indigenous group.
I've heard that some people are starting to notice that land acknowledgements are becoming common, but also have a note of being routine.
It's really true. And I think, like many reflective practices, there is power in the repetition, but that it requires the speaker and listener to be purposeful and to be present. Otherwise, they're just words. personalizing the acknowledgement is really important. Add your own values or your organization's values to explain why it's important. And explain that you understand and you acknowledge the history and who the land belonged to. For example, you can personalize the start of the acknowledgement or the whole thing. Some examples to personalize the start: as a settler myself, I'm committed to, or you can say, I come with respect for the land that I'm on today, or we acknowledge that the contributions of, for instance, the Blackfoot community, we acknowledge their contributions to the project we're involved in today, and so on. There's a lot of different ways to personalize these messages so they don't become routine.
That's really good to know, Renata. So it's okay to be a bit creative in the land acknowledgement, but is there a wrong way to do it?
It's really acceptable to be creative and to craft your own. You don't have to use the one written by the city, as many people do. You can write your own acknowledgement. And when you do, just consider these factors: the people groups, the land area and representatives. And to do it right, just ensure that you use the appropriate language, including not making euphemisms for hard topics, and learn the pronunciation of the different Indigenous groups. Use past, present, and future tenses, and focus on the acknowledgement as a celebration of a place, not a grim reminder. And just be respectful and make it heartfelt.
Okay, all really good advice, thank you. And that brings us to the end of our conversation about land acknowledgements. I've definitely learned a few things. We want to end with an action item. So Ada, tell us one simple thing that each of us can do regarding land acknowledgements.
For sure, Mike. So first of all, be present and mindful, as land acknowledgements are provided for your meetings and events, and don't let them become a routine item on the agenda. Action 2, consider adding your own values or your organization's values to explain why it's so important to you to acknowledge history and who the land belongs to.
That was a pretty good conversation. As we wrap up this session, I'd like to take just a minute to let you know that we offer a badge recognition program that is focused on supporting organizations in the early stages of action on equity, diversity, and inclusion. There are 6 badges available: leadership and capacity, accessibility, staffing, compensation, performance excellence, and learning. For each, we have a list of research-based practical indicators, and you tell us how your organization is fulfilling several of them. Then we have a confirmation meeting and award the badge. There's lots of flexibility built in, and the point is to inform and recognize your first steps on the journey of meaningful equity, diversity, and inclusion. Contact information for Ada, Renata, and myself are on screen. Please reach out to any of us or the corporate office to talk more about equity, diversity, and inclusion and how we can help you. And thanks to our partners, the Greater Parkland Regional Chamber of Commerce and the Town of Stony Plain Family and Community Support Services, who are advocates of equity, diversity, and inclusion.